Something happened in the federal budget of 2024 that's going to affect every Canadian standard of living and every employee in this country. What is that? It's the capital gains inclusion rate. Now, you might think that this only affects the ultra-rich. After all, that's what the government has been saying, right, in terms of their release of their budget. But that's not actually how things work. Canada competes for capital investment in this country. Capital investment is just a fancy way of saying we have to attract money from other sources and other countries and other investors in Canada and outside of Canada in order to be able to grow our businesses. We compete against other countries that have capital gains inclusion rates themselves. So at 50%, we were reasonably competitive to other countries. But when we increase it to 67%, we're not so competitive anymore. Investors can make more money in other countries. So by increasing it, we've made ourselves less competitive. Now, you may be saying, okay, well, Christian, it's 50% to 67%. Is that really a big deal? Yes, it is. Okay. And here's why. In history, we have an example, specifically in Canada. In 1988, then Prime Minister Brian Mulroney increased our inclusion rate from 50% to 67%, effectively taxing capital gains at a much higher rate. And then 2 years later, in 1990, he increased it to 75%. That made Canada highly uncompetitive in terms of a place to invest money, and the money just simply went to other countries which had a more competitive capital gains rate. So what happened then was that the productivity levels went down, employment started to suffer, and then Prime Minister Jean Chrétien in the late 90s reversed this from 75% to back to 50% to ensure Canada had a competitive rate to attract investment into this country. So now it confounds me why here we are about 25 years later, 26 years later, and the federal government is once again trying to raise the capital gains rate from 50% to 67%. It's already been demonstrated that it's not good for the country, that it's going to negatively impact our standard of living and the employment levels within our country. So I don't understand why this is actually happening. They say that it's to make the rich pay their fair share. But you know what? The rich, in this case, are the people who are investing this money, and they have choices. They're not going to invest just in Canada. They can move their money outside of Canada and make their money on that side in a more competitive environment. So this is problematic. So the other thing that happens in this is that the first time an investor sees this, they've increased the rate, but they saw common sense in the late 90s and they rolled it back. They've learned their lesson. But you do it a second time, like we are right now. And if we go ahead with this implementation on June 25th, as it's currently proposed, then the outside investment community is going to say, well, even if they roll this back, what's to keep them from doing this to us again? And you got to remember, capital gains are done over time. They're not something that you do every year. You put an investment in and you hope maybe 5 years, sometimes 10 years out, you're going to be able to get that gain. So if you're putting an investment and you think that the country might actually make it uncompetitive in the future, you shy away and you start investing in other countries. This is the problem with doing it a second time. So there's still a lot to be clarified. It's already just proposed at a budget level. June 25th is when they plan to implement, and they still have the laws that they have to actually write and create all the specific details. But no matter how they carve this up, at the end of the day, capital is going to be affected. And capital is required to grow companies, which creates employment, which is what creates our standard of living. So as you think about that, it's time to put some pressure back on the federal government to make sure that they don't do this.